As I prepare to share some reflection on collegiality in the Church of Africa, I do so with deep respect for the richness of all local traditions and the shared responsibility we carry in shaping a more synodal, inclusive, and faithful church. It is my hope that this modest contribution adds meaningfully to deep understanding of collegiality in the church. For collegiality is not merely a structural or administrative concept, but a living expression of communion rooted in the apostolic model of shared leadership. The Second Vatican Council emphasized this vision, calling for a church where the collective wisdom of bishops, gathered in communion with the Pope, in deep commitment to listening to the Holy Spirit in one another, shapes the pastoral and doctrinal life of the church in fidelity to the gospel. However, the practical realization of this ideal remains fraught with challenges, particularly in the African context, where local churches often find themselves on the periphery of decision-making processes. Moreover, a critical reflection on collegiality demands more than a mere acknowledgement of local churches' participation in universal governance. It calls for a radical reimagining of the relationship between the particular and the universal, one that values the local church not only as a recipient of guidance from Rome, but as an active participant in shaping the broader ecclesial direction. My presentation will explore the nuances of collegiality in the African church through two key dimensions. First, the practices of collegiality in the Church of Africa. I will highlight how collegiality is practically lived out in African local churches, shaped by the unique cultural and social context. Second, I will critically examine the dynamics and challenges of collegiality in the Church of Africa. At this point, I will have no other choice than to delve into the complex relationship between local African churches and the papal authority. Here we will explore the socio-political and cultural realities in Africa that hinder the effective realization of collegiality in the church, creating challenges to the full implementation of a vision based on collaborative and mutual decision-making. The first station, practices of collegiality in the Church of Africa. Collegiality, understood as the communal exercise of pastoral responsibility, finds in Africa a culturally fertile ground. African social fabric is traditionally communal and holistic, valuing governance based on collective consultation, group self-regulation, and respect for deliberative processes. Although we should avoid overgeneralization, for Africa is culturally diverse, with various ethnic, linguistic, and regional traditions. But broadly speaking, this statement is generally true and aligns with a broad understanding of many traditional African cultural and social systems. These traditional values often influence church governance, communal worship, and pastoral care. In many African dioceses, for example, parish and diocesan pastoral councils are active and play a significant role in managing pastoral and material affairs. These councils often include representatives of clergy, religious, laity, and occasionally youth and women, though the latter groups remain underrepresented. While the church maintains a hierarchical structure, more horizontal governance practices have emerged, particularly in rural contexts where small Christian communities play a vital role. These small Christian communities often act as the eyes and ears of the church in the community, identifying needs, injustices, or pastoral gaps. They are often seen as a new way of being church, a church close to the people and close to their pastoral, spiritual, and material needs. At the national and regional levels, Episcopal conferences are instances of collegiality where bishops regularly hold assemblies to address common concerns such as pastoral challenges, social justice, and interreligious dialogue. The Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar is also an instrument of collegiality that provides a continental platform that strengthens Africa's voice in the global ecclesial arena. These structures reflect a growing desire for collegial management of ecclesial responsibilities beyond national borders. But while collegiality is strong in theory and in many instances of practice, challenges remain. And the first challenge involves navigating the relationship between the universal governance of the church as exercised by the Pope and the increasing desire for local autonomy within African churches, particularly in matters such as episcopal appointments. One of the recurring concerns raised in various pastoral and theological settings relates to the process of episcopal appointments in Africa. While the universal church, through the Pope, has a rightful role in maintaining unity and doctrinal integrity, it is often observed that the selection of bishops on the continent remain largely centralized. In many cases, this occurs with limited consultation of the local communities that are intimately familiar with their pastoral needs, cultural contexts, and spiritual challenges. As the African church continues to grow in vitality and maturity, there is an increasing call for a more collaborative approach, one that reflects both the principle of communion with the universal church and a deeper appreciation of local insights and discernment. In several African countries, such as Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, and Zambia, pastoral challenges have occasionally emerged around episcopal appointments, particularly when bishops have been selected from outside the immediate region or without strong familiarity with local languages and cultural context. In such cases, concerns have been raised regarding the ability of newly appointed bishops to immediately connect with the life experiences and expectation of the local faithful. For example, the Zambian Episcopal Conference has on various occasions expressed a desire for greater involvement in the nomination process, emphasizing the value of appointing shepherds who are pastorally attuned and culturally rooted. This desire for greater local involvement in episcopal appointment is not therefore a call for disunity, but rather an invitation to deeper communion through contextual sensitivity. As Cardinal Dieudonné Zapalenga from Central African Republic has remarked, and I quote him, "African realities are different. Rome must take our perspectives into account because we are the ones living on the ground. This is not a rupture. It is a call for a church with an African face." In a similar spirit, Cardinal Philippe Ouedraogo from Burkina Faso has emphasized the need for greater ecclesial agency on the part of African churches. He states, "We must become ecclesial subjects, not merely pastoral objects. Africa has its rightful place in the governance of the universal church. This highlights a desire not for independence from Rome, but for genuine participation in the structures of communion." Cardinal Ouedraogo further stresses, "It is time for African Episcopal conferences to play a more active role in episcopal appointments in order to avoid misalignments between pastors and the people." His words point to a pastoral urgency to a sound decentralization. That is, the need not only for shepherds who are attuned to the lived experience, language, and culture of the community they serve, but also for local bishops to be entrusted with greater responsibility for discernment in their own context. The second challenge is sociopolitical realities and the strain on collegiality in the Church of Africa. The implementation of collegiality within the Church in Africa encounters significant challenges, largely due to the region's sociopolitical realities, such as authoritarian governance, armed conflict, and institutional fragility. These dynamics directly affect ecclesial life and pose substantial obstacles to the Church's ability to fully embrace and live out the principle of synodality. The sociopolitical context in Cameroon, for instance, Cameroon is my country, particularly the ongoing Anglophone crisis, has had significant repercussions across various sectors of national life, including the Church. This crisis, which began in 2016 as a dispute between the English-speaking Northwest and South regions and the governments, has heightened ethnic, political, and regional tensions. These divisions have unfortunately also influenced religious institutions, posing challenges to the collegiality and unity of the Church in Cameroon. Despite these difficulties, the Church remained committed to fostering dialogue, reconciliation, and peace in the midst of these complex challenges. At the same time, the political divergence within the Church regarding the Anglophone crisis has sometimes made it difficult to maintain a unified response. While some church leaders emphasize the importance of recognizing regional grievances and advocating for greater autonomy, others focus on fostering peace through dialogue with the central government, emphasizing national unity and the need for reconciliation. This range of perspectives reflects the complexity of the crisis itself, as well as the varied pastoral concern of the church leaders across the country. Despite these differences, the Church continues to work towards a common vision of peace, unity, and justice for all Cameroonians, seeking to uphold its roles as a moral guide for the nation. Another point Another challenge is cultural realities as a challenge to collegiality in African church. Recent examples highlight the ongoing tension between the Roman magisterium and African cultural and pastoral realities. One such example is the reaction to Pope Francis' apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia, particularly his cautious openness to allowing remarried divorcees to receive communion. This provision sparks strong reservation among several African Episcopal conferences, where the sacramental understanding of marriage is deeply entrenched in cultural and theological traditions. In many African societies, marriage is not only considered a sacred bond, but also a communal institution that holds significant social, cultural, and familial implications. For many African bishops, the pastoral approach proposed in Amoris Laetitia raised concerns about potential confusion and dilution of these deeply rooted values. They feared that such a shift could challenge long-standing norms regarding the indissolubility of marriage and the sanctity of family life, which are central to African social structures. Another significant example of tension between the Roman magisterium and the African pastoral realities is the 2023 declaration Fiducia Supplicans, issued by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith and approved by the late Pope Francis. This declaration permits non-liturgical blessings for irregular couples, including same-sex couples, sparking strong opposition within the African episcopate. In response, Cardinal Fridolin Obongo, Archbishop of Kinshasa and current president of the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar, issued a statement on behalf of all African and Madagascan bishops. Cardinal Obongo affirmed that the Church in Africa, in fidelity to its cultural and pastoral traditions, will not implement the provisions of Fiducia Supplicans. He argued that such blessings could be misunderstood and seen as an implicit recognition of homosexual unions, which will be contrary to the African vision of marriage and family as sacred and communal institution. Another challenge is bishop and priest, a complex relationship in the African church. In many African societies, traditional leadership structures are deeply rooted in the respect for elders and authority figures, whose guidance is often received with deference and trust. This cultural orientation naturally shapes the life of the church in Africa, where bishops are frequently regarded as paternal figures, sources of wisdom and moral authority. While this respect contributes positively to ecclesial unity and reverence for the episcopal office, it can at times lead to a more hierarchical model of church governance. In such contexts, priests may be perceived more as subordinates than as co-responsible collaborators in the mission of the church. This dynamic presents both strengths and challenges. When deference to authority becomes overly pronounced, it may limit space for open dialogue, pastoral consultation, or constructive disagreement, elements essential to the spirit of collegiality emphasized by the Second Vatican Council and reaffirmed in Pope Francis' vision of a synodal church. The synodal model, grounded in shared discernment and mutual listening, sometimes encounters cultural expectations that favor strong, centralized leadership. As a result, the development of fraternal relationships and mutual accountability among clergy can be inadvertently hindered. Moreover, this posture of reverence toward episcopal authority may also extend to the papacy in ways that unintentionally minimize the legitimate role of local discernment. In striving to remain faithful to the Pope, some bishops may hesitate to exercise their pastoral responsibility with their autonomy appropriate to their context. Encouraging a more balanced relationship, one that honors both authority and co-responsibility, could enrich the Church's witness and strengthen its missions across diverse African realities. Another challenge is financial dependence as a challenge to collegiality to the African Church. The pursuit of a more dialogical and co-responsible form of collegiality within the African Church is shaped in part by its relationship with external partners, particularly in the areas of finance, development, and pastoral aid. Many dioceses and religious communities across the continent receive significant support from Rome and other international donors to sustain their educational, healthcare, and social initiatives. This support has been vital to the Church's mission and outreach. At the same time, such partnership can sometimes give rise to dynamics that influence local priorities or decision-making processes. In certain cases, the allocation of funds may be accompanied by expectations regarding project focus or implementation, which can present challenges to the full exercise of pastoral autonomy. Navigating this relationship with transparency and mutual respect remains essential to fostering a truly synodal and contextually responsive church in Africa, one where collaboration strengthens rather than constrains local discernment and initiative. The last challenge is the role of women in the African church. In many African contexts, traditional understandings of gender roles continue to shape both social and ecclesial life. Women are often at the heart of the church's grassroots engagement, organizing liturgies, accompanying youth, supporting catechesis, and leading social outreach. Their dedication and presence are foundational to the vitality of many parishes and communities. However, their involvement in decision-making structures are at a higher level, such as diocesan council and national episcopal conferences, remains limited. This dynamic presents an opportunity for growth, ensuring greater participation of women in consultative and leadership roles will allow the church to grow more fully on the richness of their perspective, pastoral experience, and theological insight. The Synod on Synodality, with its call for a listening and participatory church, has opened new conversation across the African continent about the role of all the baptized, particularly the laity, in ecclesial governance. While the implementation of synodal principle is still evolving, some countries, such as Kenya and Uganda, offer encouraging examples where lay women are deeply engaged in pastoral life and theological reflection. Yet, their voices are not always proportionately represented in formal decision-making processes, often due to the long-standing structures and cultural expectations that prioritize clerical leadership. Some Episcopal conferences, such as those in South Africa, Uganda, and Tanzania, have taken steps to create more inclusive spaces for lay participation, including that of women. These initiatives, though still modest in scope, reflect a growing awareness of the need to expand co-responsibility within the church. As the African church continues to journey through this synodal moment, it is invited into a deeper discernment about how best to reflect the shared dignity and mission of all its members, honoring the vital contribution of women, not only in pastoral ministry, but also in shaping the church's vision and decisions. Doing so will be essential to building a more inclusive, collaborative, and missionary church in the spirit of synodality. In conclusion, the principle of collegiality, deeply rooted in the church's tradition and reaffirmed in the Second Vatican Councils, calls for mutual listening, shared discernment, and co-responsibility among all members of the church, regardless of geography or ecclesial rank. In the African context, the full realization of this vision continues to face certain challenges, shaped by a complex interplay of sociopolitical, cultural, and institutional dynamics. At times, local churches in Africa find themselves more often in the position of receiving decisions formulated in Rome or other global center for authority, rather than participating as active contributors in shaping the church's pastoral priorities and theological reflection. While this dynamic is not necessarily intentional, it can unintentionally limit the church's ability to grow fully from the richness of African lived experience and contextual discernment. African Christian communities formed within diverse cultural, historical, and social realities offer valuable perspectives that can deepen the church's universal mission. As the church continues its synodal journey, there is a growing recognition of the importance of more inclusive and reciprocal model of engagement, where local churches are not only formed by the universal church, but also help to form it in return. Embracing this dynamic of mutual enrichment can enhance the vitality of the global church and affirm the essential role of African voices in shaping its future. In this perspective, the primacy of the Pope can be understood as a ministry of unity expressed through dialogue and service. Within the African context, the vision of primacy will emphasize the Pope's role as facilitator of intercultural ecclesial dialogue. one that ensures African realities and experiences are meaningfully integrated into the discernment processes of the universal church. Such an approach reflects the model of Christ the servant, the primacy rooted not in control, but in attentive listening, accompaniment, and shared mission, especially with voices from the margins. This understanding points toward a more synodal church, one in which each local church is recognized and valued as an essential contributor to the life of the whole. It also invites a form of primacy that is open to greater decentralization, allowing space for the diverse identities of the church, including those shaped by the African cultural and spiritual context, to be fully expressed. Such a vision is not only beneficial for Africa, but also enriches the universal church, helping it live more deeply the ministry of unity in diversity. Thank you very much for your kind listening.